I have this really hard job. This job is I got to go out and advocate for taxes, and nobody is ever for taxes. You hear the Republican, and I don't mean to be partisan, but the fact is that the single thing that holds the Republican Party together in California, and now it looks like at the congressional level, which is really replicating what we've had in California, is the opposition to any taxes, any elimination of any loopholes, any deductions, exemptions, anything that's even unfair in the tax system. The idea is that we're going to drown government in the let it go down the bathtub, as Grover Norquist said. So I get the great job of talking about all the taxes that you're going to have to pay. And so here's the current picture. So far, the legislature has passed $12 billion in cuts. Going along with that, and I think it really is incumbent on you to understand what these mean. I know it's kind of boring, but what is it that the governor is trying to do and the Democrats in the legislature are trying to do? They are trying to extend the current tax package, which includes 1 cent increase in the sales tax, which gets you in many counties to 9.75 to 9.25 on the sales tax, which is among the highest in the country. As Fred pointed out, it's also a fairly narrow base. So what happens is that mostly this affects families, lower income and moderate income families disproportionately. But it is part of, raises some billions of dollars. The proposed extension is 5 years. Second is a 0.25 increase in the personal income tax. There was some talk about a surcharge. It got changed to a 0.25 increase, which means that if you're at the 1% level, you now pay 1.25. If you're at the 9.3% level, you pay 9.55. So it's a little, but it still picks up a lot of revenue just at a 1/4 cent. Half a cent increase in the vehicle license fee. Vehicle license fee is an interesting story. There became, in 1997, agitation in the state of Virginia about the car tax. And the issue got picked up in California. We got to get rid of the car tax. As far as we could tell, no one had ever complained about the vehicle license fee, but it was at 2% of the value of your car. There was a lot of machinations. It got cut, it got restored. It led to the recall of Governor Gray Davis, who restored it because, as Fred pointed out, in 2001, we'd gone down. And Governor Schwarzenegger gets elected in large part on cutting the car tax, which he comes in and does, which costs, this is before, when you look at $25 or $20 billion deficits, costs the state, because we have to pay for the loss of local revenue that's in the car tax, costs the state $6 billion a year. Right off the top, there's $6 billion in quote-unquote increased spending in out of the state budget. That increased spending is because we lost the revenue that went to local government, and the state made the commitment to backfill that revenue for local government. So when people talk about spending increases, they're really talking about substituting for revenue that was lost. Budget Chair John Laird, at one point in 2003, we also went to the ballot and said the solution to this problem is to allow for the sale of $15 billion worth of bonds in order to pay off our current expenditures, even though that is, as Fred pointed out, probably maybe unconstitutional, but we allowed it. We managed to figure out how to allow it. So we're paying back $3 billion in debt. So when you start, just starting, before you've gotten to a normal budget picture, you're $6 billion in the hole on the elimination of the car tax or on the reduction in the vehicle license fee, and $3 billion on the hole in paying back the money that you borrowed to balance your budget. So you're starting off $9 billion in the hole as a result of specific actions that were taken by the legislature, by Governor Schwarzenegger, and ultimately by the voters in borrowing this money. So we're looking to restore 0.5 on the vehicle license fee to go from 0.65 to 1.15. And the other billion, amounting to $1 billion, the legislature, when they were cutting taxes in the late 90s, did something that was very progressive, which was to increase the child credit, which eliminated for working families tax burdens if you're under $40,000 or $45,000 and 2 kids, It really significantly lowered your tax burden. The legislative package in 2009 was what you're looking at right there, was to basically was to pass a package of tax increases that amounts to arguably taxing a lot of taxes on ordinary taxpayers. This is what was going to go to the ballot. So how many people are for extending the package of taxes, the tax extensions, in order to deal with our budget problem? Okay. How many are against that? No, very few here. Okay, one person here. And what we have to argue, as somebody who argues for progressive and fair taxation, this package is not what you would call the fairest package that you might be able to come up with, and I'll give you some alternatives as we go through. The argument you ultimately have to make is that it is much better for all of us to pay our nickels and dimes across the board on our vehicles, on our purchases, on our income, on our children even, and that one is, by the way, in polling, very unpopular when you break these down, but it is more progressive or more sensible to extend these taxes on ordinary people than to make the severe cuts that you may see when Jerry Brown proposes his budget without these tax extensions in it. So here's some other proposed revenues in the current budget, and bear with me here because we're probably not going to see them. We almost got 53 out of needed 54 votes to eliminate redevelopment. Redevelopment is essentially a zero-sum game by which local governments, by which cities are able to capture parts of the growth in the property tax and therefore keep them from going to counties and schools. Well, since the state pays for a lot of county services as well as paying for schools, it's seen as a loss to the state. So they're very controversial. There are a lot of people who like redevelopment. There's low-income housing that gets funded by redevelopment. There are tons of abuses of redevelopment that people have documented. But that was a major part of the governor's program. Has not happened, is not likely to happen, could happen in some form. Second one, and now people won't believe me when I say this, but as part of passing those ordinary tax increases that I just showed as part of the package, the legislature changed the formulas by which they allocate income, by which multi-state and multinational corporations allocate income to California. Bear with me here, because as soon as you say this stuff, everybody's eyes glaze over. But because from the Republican point of view and various special interests, I won't put it as partisan, it was interest groups, when they changed the formula to benefit in-state California corporations, companies like Microsoft and Comcast and Ford and Procter & Gamble all said, hey, we're going to be paying more taxes. So the notion was that nobody, whether in-state or out-state, should be required to pay more taxes. And what the state of California did to our national embarrassment, and mine personally, because I was trying to stop it and failed, is that multi-state or multinational corporations can choose every year what formula they want to allocate income to California. So if they take losses, they can allocate more and then write it off against less income when they make that choice. This is truly the way our tax policy got made, again, over, personal failure of mine, but also at the national level, nobody does this. So it's an example of how bad our tax politics are, to that we basically said to out-of-state companies, when we're changing the formulas to benefit in-state companies, that they still get the choice to choose the old formula. That cost us $1 billion. Jerry Brown, to his credit, said eliminate that. And I've talked to Republican legislators who say, yeah, it's a terrible, stupid policy, but I can't vote for it because it's a tax increase at this point. I wouldn't have voted for it in the first place, but now it's a tax increase if I vote for it. And that's where, when we go back to the underlying ideology, is even an indefensible tax policy, we can't vote for and can't get 2/3 vote. Enterprise zones are another, have been shown by real academic analysis to have no benefit for jobs, just they reshuffle jobs around the state. Places that are enterprise zones are, so that one is to be eliminated. So there's another $4 billion yearly. So let me talk about some alternatives. We polled and tried to get Jerry Brown to add a 1% increase on the top 1% in California. There's a bill, several bills that do this. And why did we say that? Because the Bush tax cuts gave the top 1% in California $9 billion worth of tax relief. When we polled this is off the charts, 78% favorable to taxing 1% on the 1%. Could be temporary, could be permanent, raises probably more now than $2.3 billion. Oil severance, there are bills in on that, some of which are to give them entire, Alberta to Rico previously, Warren Foratani now, to give the money to higher education, as Texas has done with its oil revenue for years and built the University of Texas around it. We're the only place in the world without a production tax. All the studies show, we're based on the world market. I can spend as much, I've worked on this for many, many years. We're off the charts low. Sarah Palin went out and increased the production tax in oil. I said, bring her here to talk to some of our folks to tell her that makes sense. And I've heard her speak on the subject. Other revenues, Fred talked about the sales tax base. In fact, Governor Schwarzenegger proposed not only an oil severance tax, but also to broaden the sales tax base. And we've been fighting for years. Finally, all the major retailers. I've been going around lobbying with Walmart and Home Depot and Best Buy on the issue of why we're not collecting interstate sales on electronic commerce. Amazon has been the huge outlier. Their entire business model has been based on avoiding taxation, which they have absolutely explicitly said. And there are, we think we might get that this year because it's a collection issue and not a tax increase issue. Other things, alcohol, tobacco, marijuana. The DEA was, some of the medical marijuana were actually putting money in the bank to pay sales taxes on their sales. And the DEA took it out of their bank accounts from time to time, but there is a lot of money there on, on those issues. All right, here's the last. I'm going to stop here. I have, maybe I'll stop here. Not yet. Let me do this one last one. The 2/3 vote for taxes. When you have a minority party that says the only issue is no new taxes, you get either held hostage in the occasional effort to get any taxes. But however, here's the problem. We have polled this extensively. Well, in under term limits, the way the legislature works, that, I remember there were plenty of Republicans who said, I can go back to my district with a vote on taxes. So it's not just ideological change, it's also legislative change where people have to run for the next office over and over again and cannot, I've had Republicans tell me, yeah, I'd be with you except that I'd lose my job. And it comes down to that. So there's a directional problem. Once you have a 2/3 vote requirement in effect, we've polled this extensively, and you say, hey, how about this? Is it fair, et cetera? People say, yeah, maybe I could consider it. Then you give the punchline on the other side. You think it should be easier for the Sacramento politicians to raise your taxes? How many people think it should be easier for the Sacramento politicians to raise your taxes? Probably not that many in this room, and if it's not that many in this room, you can imagine what it's like with the public. So actually, there is a change that might take place that we're trying to talk about for the 2012 ballot, along with some of these other tax issues, just to mention, because if you can't do them in the legislature, you've got to go to the ballot, and it is a majority, which would do what Jerry Brown was suggesting, but not have the requirement of a 2/3 vote. In other words, taxpayer right to vote, it's not really exciting policy, but it's one that could win, which is to say that a majority of the legislature can put a measure on the ballot for the voters. Now I want to show one. This is from Phil's issue and mine as well. This is what's here. Here we are. We are in a kind of religious environment, which we changing the 2/3 vote requirement even to that double majority involves taking Prop 13 on. All the close the loophole involves taking it on. And as long as we treat it religiously, as we are here, bowing down to the altar of Prop 13, we're not going to get out of our mess.